Oh, this one is funny, right? Extra deck is getting homo, or I haven't watched this. I think the joke is that it's supposed to be the extra deck is getting homogenous, but otherwise it's just crazy. Man, they got both giant cards. Mine's still damaged. I don't have mine yet. My Ash Blossom, like the fixed one. Otherwise, it's cool though too. All right, guys, remember to go sub to the channel. We are watching as well. Give them our support.
So today I wanted to talk about what I consider to be the homogenization of Yu-Gi-Oh's extra.
Yeah, exactly. He means homogenous, not homosexual, because it's kind of crazy to imply that. But I got the clickbait. It's kind of nice.
Deck summoning mechanics, and just share my thoughts on it. Hear what other people have to say. When I say homogenization, you might be thinking I'm talking about like, oh, everybody's just running the same extra deck cards. And that's not really the point of the video. I mean, it isn't untrue. There are lots of really good, strong, sort of staple extra deck monsters. But I'm more so talking about the actual mechanics and the way that these summons work and how they all kind of seem to be melting together and converging a little bit. So I think the best place to start with a conversation like this is, you know, what makes each summoning mechanic unique and sort of where they started versus where they are now. So if you start with fusion monsters, they were not good. Fusion summoning in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh was kind of just a recipe for disaster. You had to have polymerization, you had to have 2 specifically named fusion material monsters, and then once you had all of that, you make your fusion monster that had terrible stats and no effect, and it was just overall asking way too much.
Never playable in the original
and stuff like that to end up with just nothing really worth your trouble in return. As the years go on, of course, fusion monsters change. They get better effects. They get easier material requirements. One of the big sort of advances being like the cards like Elemental Hero, Absolute Zero, where it's like a hero monster and a water monster, or a Shaddoll fusion and, you know, Shaddoll plus light monster makes construct, right? Also, you kind of remember that with Shaddoll fusion, there were a lot of archetypes really that started to get sort of their own fusion spell, their archetype specific fusion spell. Plus, just in general,
it's crazy this is considered old, by the way, as someone who's been playing for so long, because I remember those. I don't even consider those cards that old. Although when you think about it, they are like really old. I guess Miracle Fusion is a lot older, but it was really unique for quite a while.
We skip forward then to Synchro monsters, which were really quite unique when they came out. A little controversial, I remember. I was there at the time, but it takes a tuner and a non-tuner. I know I'm explaining the basics of Synchro monsters like it's something new here, but just bear with me. So, you know, your tuner monster kind of has to add up to, your tuner plus your non-tuner has to add up to the level of what you're making, and it was kind of neat, right? Like, it took away the need for a spell, and it just made it a little bit easier, but there's still some stipulations. Xyz monsters, I would say, even further streamlined the extra deck process, where it's just 2 monsters that are the same level, likely like a level 4 or something, so you end up with things like the rank 4 toolbox, and you overlay the monsters, and then like now your Xyz monster kind of gets to use its materials by like detaching them for effects, and so it felt still really very unique. Okay, now we skip to Link monsters, and that's sort of where this real conversation begins to sort of take shape.
Are you just complaining the Links are maybe too easy to summon?
Link monsters are kind of just nothing, really. Like, they take...
In my head, Link monsters are synchros with none of the restrictions. Unless, I guess, the gimmick was supposed to be the arrow thing at the start. But it's just such a non-factor in games, the arrow stuff. Like, I don't think the arrow stuff is particularly, like, a thing I like about the Links or the game. So I have no problem with those not being a really important mechanic, but they also, like, don't really matter.
Now, what I've sort of started to notice is that all of Yu-Gi-Oh's summoning mechanics have started to try to kind of be Link monsters, because it's really necessary in today's Yu-Gi-Oh that extra deck monsters are not just easy to access, but like can almost be sort of cheated out. So let's go back then to fusion monsters and sort of see how it got this way. We obviously have contact fusion.
Okay, but yeah, about to say contact fuse, but contact fuse existed long before even synchros, right? They like, this is a Neospatian thing, is when I think the first ones were, or no, even the ABC pieces, right? Not ABCs, the XYZ. So like, that is part of the original fusion mechanic. It really old, like really old, way before Shaddoll fusion, in fact. So like, I can't really like discredit contact fusion is like just new Link summoning, because I mean, it's not. Contact fusion has been a thing for a long time as a way of making fusions a bit better, but it's also not the only way fusions are played. Like, I kind of getting what he's saying, but I also don't agree with it. Like, Links are more powerful than the rest because, yeah, they have like the easiest conditions to meet to summon them. And is that a problem for Links being too powerful, kind of drowning out the rest of the cards, or forcing other types of summoning to power creep up and then be even stronger for the payoff? or the payoff be, or the cost to make them be less. Sure, but I think identity still remains intact. Like level, like in synchro decks, being particular and specific with your levels is still important, even if you have more ways to summon tuners and non-tuners to make it easy and flexible. Rank 4s and exceeds, you still need to play like, I don't know. I feel like that one hasn't changed like at all. That's still what it is. Like, yeah, links are the ones that kind of feel the least special because for me they just feel like synchros but easier to make. And I guess that's the argument you want, sure, but I don't know how this really gets along with everything else.
And Contact Fusion early on was something that was kind of unique to a deck like Cyber Dragons or Gladiator Beasts. Later on,
it really wasn't that unique, right? Because it was the XYZ pieces. There was, and then all the other unions as well. There was the Neosmations. There's Gladiator Beast. Sure, Cyber Dragon, and that's 4 different decks, right? Like, it depends what do you consider old and classic as well. Because then Blue Eyes got one at some point. Colossus is a fucking weird one. I don't know what count that. That by standard, that's already 6 years old, right? So I'm like, I'm not sure where you're gonna be looking at it, and I'm sure I'm forgetting other archetypes as well that the Contact fused. Like, yeah, they don't overdo it. That's fine. You shouldn't overdo any one thing to be, yeah, because then every deck does look the same. But Contact fusing also isn't the super like elite thing that doesn't happen.
On Ritual Beast, we're kind of known for doing like the Contact
Ritual Beast too.
thing,
Yep.
but only a few decks could do it, and so it sort of felt special. Nowadays, though, when I think about the best fusion monsters and like decks and mechanics and stuff, they pretty much are all just Contact fusing, right? Like there are different flavors to it. You could take a card like Blazing Cartesia, right, to kind of take the place of a spell, and then you're just using it in another monster, and
you're counting that as Contact fusing? I don't. That's just removing the need of a fusion spell for the sake of maintaining card economy, right? I don't think this is the same. And they have fusion spell. They have Branded Red, Branded Retribution, Branded Fusion. Like, is Melodies Contact fusing because of Soprano? No, Soprano just replaces the fusion spell, and you still have Concerto and Ostinato. Contact fusing like Ashloud is stupid. That's very powerful. They should be careful with making those because I think Phantom Bell is way too strong. I think Ashloud being a one of like type of card is fine because it's not crazy powerful, but it is still strong. But they have to be very careful with that type of mechanic because that's kind of crazy. It's like the Colossus type of thing as well. Those type of things where if you've done X, you can summon is kind of a whole other problem, which is a little more unique at the moment at least, but is very powerful. So we'll see if that becomes a problem. But either way, like I wouldn't count this as Contact fusing. Are you counting the tiers as Contact fusing? They're still also different, right? Like those are unique. I don't know if I'd count it with Contact fusing because it requires a trigger activator, right? It's not just that it happens. Because when I envision Contact fusing, I imagine just like it's like a synchro or a link where there's no activated effect they can negate. It's just me putting them into the grave and then summoning them, right? So the closest thing to Contact fusing would be Astrolabe and Phantom Bell because to me they don't start a chain, they just summon themselves. They can't be negated effect wise. It's just you Contact fusing from the graveyard instead of versus the field. That's how I view Contact summoning. Because otherwise you're kind of reaching and the line between what counts as a Contact fuse is kind of like blurred. Because if all your idea is for not Contact fusing is requiring a fusion spell, then like that's like weird. Was Anaconda a Contact fusion? No. I wouldn't. It's not what I would call it. Like, what about Proxy F Magician? Like, I don't know. It's weird. So I wouldn't like. Yeah. Oh, Dragon Buster as well. Yeah, Dragon Buster as well. Yeah. The traps count as Contact fusion. Yeah. So I think this argument is kind of lost in the sauce. We'll keep hearing Matt, right? Only 4.5 minutes, and so maybe there's a better idea of what he's getting at.
You're making a fusion. It's efficient because it means you don't have to have a spell card. Granted, I know Brandon's got access to Branded Fusion, which is busted.
You think what he's getting at is that it's from a very macro level view, it's basically Contact fusing card. She's searchable, removes the need to have a poly or spell for the fusion. Don't agree with it, but he was saying like it's basically link summoning. Kind of get it. It's just not though. I don't feel like Resolvent Cartesia is link summoning. If he uses from the hand, it's not like link summoning. It specifies the type of monster it can summon. It can do it during the player's turn. I mean, so can some link monsters, I guess, but like I have never once thought Cartesia is like link summoning.
Busted and good.
Like I think maybe a better example if we really wanted to was like Melodious Soprano because that fuses only from the field. And even then, like I'm not like it's also not the entire dynamic of the deck, right? If having a card in your deck that lets you treat fusion summoning like link summoning as an alternative way to summon it, so you have multiple different avenues to fusion summon, that's not the worst. Yeah, Albaz is a weird one as well. Is Albaz Contact fusing? Yeah, probably Albaz.
For a bunch of other reasons, but Blazing Cartesia is link summoning to some degree. And also, you look at maybe a card like Thunder Dragon Colossus, right? Where
But Kochizi, so also with Kochizi, you just don't even have to fuse with itself, right? Like, you used to have 2 fusion materials in hand, you can fuse materials in your hand together. That is nothing like link summoning, right? There's not a card that says you can link summon using materials from your hand, not including this card. Any card that says link summon from the hand, like, is a card in the hand that does it and says use this card, right? It's like weird. Colossus feels like a fucking link. Colossus is kind of dumb, but
where it's kind of just fusion summoning itself. Like, you know, you've used a Thunder Monster's effect, and so now you just tribute any Thunder Monster, and poof, Colossus is there. It might as well be a Link 1 monster.
Titan is also another weird one. The thing is, though, if with these, like, more out there weird mechanics, right? Like, I understand they want to keep it the Thunder Monsters fusions, but also making them more modern, still be able to use Thunder Dragon fusion, like, bridge together the lore and playstyle with, like, Twin Thunder Dragon. That's, like, more understandable, as long as this isn't a pattern of, like, every card becomes like Colossus in the future. A certain way of designing a card in a unique fashion, fine. And so far, at least I don't think there's more Colossus type cards coming out, but if that becomes the standard for what they make as far as cards, then yeah, that's a problem. Colossus is a bit overtuned. That one's funky. A bit too powerful for what it is and a bit too easy to summon. I think Titan's a better example of, like, making that a little more unique, a little more fixed, but yeah. And then still being important to summon via the fusion methods.
I mean, you don't even have to use like a Thunder Dragon monster to make it. It's just any Thunder, and it can be like.
Yeah, I mean that's also kind of silly, any Thunder, but like, sure. I don't think that's what really makes the argument. The issue is, like, the blurred, or the lines get blurred so easily on, like, all of these talking points that it's kind of hard to, like, make actual argument. It's really hard, unless being extremely rigid in your definitions of things, which I think is really hard to do, and also kind of just arbitrary.
Splash index sometimes and stuff like that. But it doesn't, like, what are you fusing there, really? Like, you know, it's kind of not really fusion summoning anymore. Now, again, I'm not complaining, just, you know, hear me out. I do have, like, good and bad thoughts on this to share at the end, but that's sort of how, like, fusion monsters have begun to replicate Link monsters. If you want a really extreme example, look at Vicious Astrolaud. I mean, it literally just fusion summons itself by banishing the materials straight from the graveyard. And then you've got things like Tearlaments, and even like a lower tier deck like Ninjas. They don't actually have, like, really a dedicated fusion spell. You just kind of, like, send the monsters. Okay, so what?
So that exists solely so that you can play with face down monsters for Ninjas. That's why you need to have fusions over Links, which is, like, a weird, like, loophole in the game mechanics of Links with fusions. So that's, like, the only reason it exists like that. So that's why it's like that. So I also understand why it's like that. So Konami, that design philosophy makes sense. And it is unique as well because it's specifically designed for that fashion. However, yeah, otherwise it feels like Link summoning. Go Link with face downs? Oh, only the Link one, right? And that's also a new card. Yeah, I mean, listen, if they remade all the fucking Ninja fusions as Link monsters and Tobimaru just had Link summon, that would be fine. But, like, you'd have to add in using face down monsters if you want onto every single card, which, like, works. But yeah, I think what they did is fine, making it fusion.
What about synchro monsters? Well, I think that the really obvious example here would probably be cards like Chaos Angel that just don't actually take.
I mean, this one's kind of crazy, but again, there's the one of, right? This one is fucking mental, but yeah.
Tuners. Chaos Angel says, oh, you're using, like, you know, a lighter dark monster. You can just treat it as a tuner. Cool. It's just a tuner now.
But the thing is, yeah, so Chaos Angel's kind of crazy. It does feel like a Link, but it's still, the thing is, you still have to be conscious of your level requirements, which does make it more unique to synchros. So Chaos Angel isn't a card you can just play in light and dark decks, right? You have to make sure you're playing it like level 5s or 6s and 4s or 8s and 2s or 7s and 3s. There should be a way to line up those levels, right? So if you're playing a deck with Malicious plus a 4 makes it, or Bistral plus a 4 makes it. Or in Labyrinth, an 8 plus a 2, your Lady plus a Stovey Torby, right? You have clear level patterns that make it summonable, right? If I throw this in a tier deck that doesn't play Melee, for example, fuck, I'm never summoning it. My deck is full of darks, but I'm not playing it. So, yeah, I mean, it still has some of its traits. Now, is it a bit iffy that Knights don't need tuners and it's kind of getting rid of, like, the essence of synchros? It's weird. But I also encourage Konami to be creative with design philosophies and trying new things out to see what works, see what people enjoy, because that is ultimately the more important thing. And I think Chaos, and especially if it's not in a manner that, like, is toxic for the game. I think Chaos Angel is totally fine. I think that's a cool card that exists. If every card became like Chaos Angel, okay, well then that's them just phoning it in and putting in a card that, like, works and overdoing it. But I think It's neat.
We technically have seen that before. If I think of a card like Cyber slash Harpy, they're kind of able to do that as well. But it was like archetype tied and kind of just very like niche application thing. Chaos Angel, meanwhile, is a lot more generic. And it effectively makes Chaos Angel into a link monster for a deck like, say, Labyrinth that don't actually have tuners. They can just make it, and it's good. And like, it's not really synchro summoning, it's just sort of there. There's also things like Crimson Dragon and Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon, where they're just kind of like leaving the field and then just bringing a whole new synchro onto the field without really synchro summoning it.
That doesn't matter.
And then what about Xyz monsters? I think these are
It involves synchro summoning ahead of time. Okay, that one, I don't even know what to talk about for that one. That's like, you're trading a level 8 synchro Excel for a new level 8 synchro. Why does that matter? That's like saying overlays are bad, where you can rank on top of like Utopia for Utopia Ray back in 2012. That's fine. That's okay. Like, I don't really care.
Definitely pretty big culprits for a long time.
So the thing is as well, I think he's talking about like, almost gets into like the discussion, and maybe the problem here is he just doesn't like a bunch of generic cards. And it's hard to try the line of what's too generic and problematic, where I think Appaloosa is just way too powerful for being a generic card. But you do need some generic powerful cards, right? At least you expect them to exist, because they've always existed, right? And when the game was slower, you had a lot more spells, monsters, traps in the main deck. When the game is faster and you want to access these cards every game, unless they're searchable in your main deck, you don't access them in your first like 5 or 6 cards. You don't see it. So your way of making those powerful cards accessible at all times, making them a toolbox in the extra deck, and that's what Yu-Gi-Oh is. So I think you need to power curve it to an extent. You can't have these cards be too powerful or be too omnipresent in the metagame, because then yes, every deck becomes homogenous because every deck is someone's Appaloosa IP. I think it's kind of a problem I have right now. And Baron and Savage were also like that too. I think Savage was fine. Baron was more of a problem. But like those are things we have to keep in mind of. But I also don't think having generic cards is too big of a deal, as long as they are appropriate level. I think Chaos Angel is a great example of something that's fair. It's a very strong card, but it's also like manageable, going first or second pretty easily. And it's like not the easiest commitment in the world.
Xyz have been able to like rank up, and there have even been Xyz monsters that can layer on top of other things, like, you know, Downerd Magician or something like that. But the really two big offenders here are obviously Zeus and Typhon.
I think those are some of the coolest cards that have ever come out. I'm kind of sad those are the ones he doesn't like. I think those cards are awesome. Typhon is the bit of a weirder one because it doesn't require an Xyz, but Zeus is so cool because I think just cards that help you compete going second are fantastic for the game, and cards you can play around but have incredible punishes if you don't play around it. And we have so many cards that rank up on top of each other, right? You have the Crystal Zero Lancer, you got Downerd, you got the Zoo monsters, you got Gaia Dragon Thunder Charger, you got the Utopia Ray, you got Utopia Lightning, you got Utopia Prime. I'm sure I'm missing so many of them. Xyz on top of an Xyz isn't a new mechanic. It existed for a very long time, and Zeus fills that. It's a very fucking powerful one. But that one fits in line. Typhon being able to go on top of everything is a little bit crazier. You know, it doesn't fit with the Xyz mechanic as much. It fits more in with what a Zoo does, but without really being a Zoo monster required. Restriction is harsh, and the biggest thing is supposed to be like the antithesis to Zeus, which I think lore-wise and design-wise is still cool. And it's not like it's a trend; it's a one-off thing. I don't imagine it'll be a trend where you can just turn anything into Typhon. Like, could Typhon have been a Link 1? Yeah, sure. But I think the whole point and the appeal to that is they make the Xyz like a Link 1 for the trade-off of making it lore accurate or design philosophy to look cool. Because the whole point is Zeus opposes Typhon and Typhon opposes Zeus, because they summon an Xyz and they put a Zeus on top. Typhon now beats it and forces them to Zeus earlier on the second to summon monster. Link 1 would make it better, though. It would make it slightly better, but it wouldn't make a huge difference. And they could have made it a Link 1. But I think it's cool to keep it as an Xyz because that's the lore they're going for. And what does it cost us? A powerful Xyz that almost looks like a Link. Sure, whatever. Like, that's not big. So again, like, I don't mind stuff like that happening.
At least makes some sense. It's another, you know, Xyz monster that's just kind of like ranking on top of an Xyz monster. And you had to battle first. It's in main phase 2. It's very strong, but it kind of feels like a fair enough trade and sort of makes sense. You're cheating it out, but whatever. Then you look at something like Typhon, right? Where it's just like, yeah, it just goes on any monster. It's a Link monster. You turn a monster into a Typhon, and now you've kind of got this strong floodgate style effect just here. I mean, it's not to say that Typhon doesn't have drawbacks, but I mean, like, you are not Xyz summoning Typhon, right? So I think Xyz definitely have kind of started to copy Link monsters in that way. This technically even goes for ritual monsters to some degree. Like, if you look at Voiceless Voice, really, it's not doing like ritual summons in the normal way. You barely actually use the ritual spell to do it. They have several effects that can just...
Saphira copies the ritual spell. I'm counting that as using the ritual spell. I mean, this is again just kind of like reaching. When you're modernizing an old mechanic, and like that is what fusions and all these things are, especially like rituals that were even bad on release, you need to make up for the problems they have. And part of the problems these deck have is they'll require like the resource cost of the card, the spell card to summon it, and the payoff itself, right? And the card economy involved in that is insane. As long as the economy does it in unique ways for per each archetype, finding ways to mitigate and not really suffer to that cost, and that you know, main critical drawback of ritual summoning or fusion summoning, then that's fine. Konami make Gemini good? You won't. That one's, yeah. I mean, maybe that's a cool discussion video for another time, is how to make Geminis good. In fact, you know what? I'll put that down on my list of something to do. Because yeah, it is hard to make these mechanics maintain their essence while also like still being good and not just being super neg. It's a weird thing. That's another discussion video we can have. But for rituals, like, I don't think voice is cheating. I think it very much lines up with how to modernize a ritual deck, because there's different ways of doing it. Necros did it differently as well. Different ritual spells. They had even more different ways of doing it, and it required ritual spells, but like the rituals had to be really good. They had to not use really monsters from the hand, or they had to ritual from the grave, and then also replace themselves afterwards in order for the card economy to not just be totally brutalized by, you know, the things that are involved in ritual summoning.
Just kind of like summon ritual monsters out on their own, almost like Link 1s, even from the deck. So overall, just zooming out.
If the ritual monster is ritual summon itself, like he says, you can reveal this card and ritual summon it. Are there any cards like that? There probably are rituals like that, but that would be the one that's more like it. Maizu Decay was an example of ritual getting good in old Yu-Gi-Oh! Even then, it wasn't really good. It was just like acceptable. That's because that was the best way of curbing card economy, right? Was it became a 2-card combo instead of a 3-card combo. Megaliths, it was a bit different. Yeah, sure. But the Megaliths discard themselves, right? Even Gishki cheat. Well, they have to find a way to make it manageable to attribute stuff. Ohime is a weird one. Ohime is barely a ritual monster. So that one, like if someone tried complaining about Ohime, that one I guess I'd get a little more, because what the fuck do you ritual summon that card with? I guess Kagura is sometimes, but like that's not real. Like it's definitely summoning it off of the quick play spell most of the time. But yeah.
Out on its summit, feels like Konami has really kind of just meshed all of the extra deck summoning things together. They all sort of just feel like they're copying Link monsters. They're requiring as few external parts and sort of needed things, and in my opinion, are kind of losing some of their identity in the process. I mean, the charitable way to look at this is probably that, well, this gives a lot more decks options, and they sort of get creativity with like the extra deck as a toolbox, right? More decks are able to use something like Chaos Angel, or a lot of decks can make use of Zeus and Typhon, and that's really cool. But on the other hand, I guess it's like, well, if that's the case, what is a synchro summon really if it's just for Chaos Angel? What is an Xyz summon if it's really just putting Typhon on something? What's a fusion summon if you actually just kind of like plopped Colossus out, like it just showed up? I think it also speaks to maybe like Yu-Gi-Oh's design space starting to just feel a little bit cramped, because every summoning mechanic is just sort of a different form of Link monsters. It feels like, what more can we really do?
I thought that Jesse
sort of
was
having
cooked.
to kind of copy each other. It's part of the reason why I think that Yu-Gi-Oh! Really can't afford to get a new summoning mechanic, as cool as it would be to have one, because it feels like we just explored everything already. We've had monsters shuffle themselves back into the deck in various different ways. We've had cards banish themselves. We've just done everything you can possibly do to turn 2 monsters, or in some case, 1 monster, into a card from your extra deck. So if there is a new summoning mechanic, I just don't really know what design space it would really occupy. And
yeah, that's a whole other discussion. I mean, the thing is, because they're bending the rules a bit with how to summon monsters via contact fuse, or special by banishing from the grave, shuffle back from the field, synchro without needing tuners, right? As they kind of bend that, it does become kind of hard to think, how else would they design a new card, right? And that's a whole other kind of argument. You can maybe wonder if it needs to exist. Do you need another type of new summoning mechanic? I don't think so, but I think it's a whole other discussion potentially you make. I don't even know when to start with that. I honestly wouldn't know where to start. You can talk about all these mechanics and such, so you can incorporate to make a new summoning mechanic, but they could just be incorporated into fusion monsters or synchros or links, like just as a slightly different version of the same thing. As Konami has run out of ideas, I mean, there's still much to do, right? I'm sure they can keep innovating. I'm gonna hear this out and then do some closing thoughts.
And to be clear, I mean, I think it's cool when it's like an archetype specific thing. Like if, Ritual Beasts can do contact fusing that can kind of make them unique. But when any deck can make these cards, well, then it's just sort of a generic thing. One other thing worth mentioning is that we have found over time a lot of these things just sort of get themselves banned. Colossus being so easy to make had kind of been part of what got it banned, right? A lot of the strong Link 1 monsters were banned because they're Link 1 monsters, and we know how good
Whole
Link
other
1
problem in its
monsters
entirety,
are.
but yeah.
Overall, I don't know. I guess I just find myself mixed. Like, it's cool that a lot of decks can access the extra deck as a toolbox, and it certainly gives more decks options and makes the game kind of feel more dynamic and broadens what you can do, but it also just feels like they're all the same. I don't know. So you guys can let me know how you feel about this. Do you think that this is an issue, like a real problem in Yu-Gi-Oh, or is it maybe not? And like, it's fun because like your deck can do a lot of different stuff. I don't know.
Yes, I went out of this feeling that extra deck monsters are honestly not homo. I disagreed with a lot of things there, and I think Konami's done mostly a good job at making things unique. And while some stuff have overlap to an extent, there's a lot of cool things, and Konami's willing to experiment with differences. Things need to be different. I don't want every single fusion deck to be activate a fusion spell and fuse 2 from hand as well. That's also not good, right? Because if every fusion deck looks identical, that also means that within the fusion space, it loses its own identity. There is some cards that could be problematic if they continue making designs in the same fashion, but I don't think they have, and hopefully they won't. And there are some things like the Cartesia thing, which I think is just not a good point in general. I think this isn't a big problem. The big problem, if I thought this problem would totally be just like generic extra deck monsters being kind of too powerful for what they are. Like, I thought Phoenix was a great example of something that was costly. It was rather inefficient, but it was there because it was accessible, right? So if you needed something for convenience sake versus power, you can summon and play Phoenix. Where SP feels like it's just the best in both scenarios. It's better than any card you could play elsewise, but it's also generic, so the cost of putting it in this is just nothing. SP, at least, I think is a well-designed card in terms of what it does. That's my best thing about it, but I think like Apo in like contrast isn't. I think Apo is an unfair card and it's bad card design, while also just being very easily accessible and better than anything else. The drawback to making Apo versus another monster is kind of like, what? There's no drawback. IP to SP is a bit broken. Yeah, but I think IP is one of the problem there anyways. The more I think about it, IP is actually kind of a problem as well. I was talking about like how I want trap decks to be playable. And a big problem with trap decks is IP into like Trisbania or Zeraboros is like really hard to answer. And maybe that just really means IP shouldn't exist. And I really wouldn't have pegged the card as being too broken if I would have thought about it. But maybe as a product of the times, IP is no longer something that's good for the game. If you act like all the generic monsters for the extra deck, then that gets a different story. But I think at this point, maybe it's too far gone. Maybe better if IP were Link 3 as well. Perhaps, but I'm not sure. I think that's really all there is to the discussion. I think not really the topic I expected, but I also don't agree with it. I thought it'd be more on the generic boss monster thing, which I think is more of a problem that at least has been somewhat addressed in recent times, and I hope keeps getting addressed as we go forward.